All right, well, we begin this morning with President Biden landing in Europe for two crucial international summits. But his domestic agenda still up in the air after a vote on his trimmed-down bill was abandoned last night.
The president wanted to get his deal over the line before the trip, urging House Democrats yesterday to support the near $2 trillion package. But divisions within the party kept lawmakers from approving the new scaled-back framework. A vote is now expected next week. Earlier, the president arrived at the Vatican for a meeting with Pope Francis. Next up, talks with Italy's prime minister and French President Emmanuel Macron ahead of this weekend's G20 summit. The president had hoped to tout his new package on the world stage, but speaking ahead of the trip, President Biden said compromise was necessary to get it done.
I think we have I know we have a historic economic framework. It's a framework that will create millions of jobs, grow the economy, invest in our nation and our people. No one got everything they wanted, including me. But that's what compromise is. That's consensus. And that's what I ran on. I've long said compromise and consensus are the only way to get big things done in a democracy.
We'll speak with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale in just a moment on the latest developments in Washington. But we're going to start in Rome with the president's stay ahead and NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga. So, Claudio, as we mentioned, the president met with the Pope, becoming only the second Catholic president to do so. But late yesterday, we heard the Vatican made some changes to that meeting. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right, Joe. Yesterday, the Pope said that the scheduled live broadcast of the Biden's arrival at the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican all the way to the handshake with Pope Francis was cancelled. So that fueled a lot of speculation and conspiracy theories, of course. Well, now the Vatican said that in the end, this is a normal protocol under COVID-19. But let me tell you what usually happens is that we see a live broadcast of the head of state, in this particular case, President Biden, arriving in the courtyard of the Apostolic Palace. And then the cameras follow him live to the first floor of the Apostolic Palace, all the way walking down the corridors, all the way to where he shakes hands with the Pope before they disappear into the library where they have a private meeting. Now, the only thing that we saw this morning was the motorcade of President Biden arriving in the courtyard of the Apostolic Palace, and that was it. Now, the Vatican says, well, it's all under control, it's all normal, it's all protocol under COVID-19 rules. Joe.
So, Claudio, even though it was a closed-door meeting, do we have any idea what they discussed?
Well, we know that probably they will discuss about some of the issues they really care about that are very important right now. Well, at the top of the agenda will be climate change. This is something that is very high on the agenda of both Pope Francis as well as President Biden. Why is that very important? Well, because this is going to be the only occasion, the only opportunity they have to talk to each other about that, because Pope Francis has already announced that he will not travel to Glasgow next week to the much important COP26 UN conference on climate that President Biden will attend. And this morning, Pope Francis, perhaps not coincidentally, released an audio message to the BBC radio summoning all the leaders attending that conference to do more, to find solution to cut greenhouse emissions. So that would be definitely top of the agenda, Joe.
Yeah, definitely not coincidental, that message. So, Claudio, let's also talk about the president meeting Italy's prime minister and French President Macron. What's on the agenda there, and how are preps going for this weekend's G20 summit?
Well, that's right. Well, he will later on, President Biden will meet the president of Italy as well as the prime minister. But the most important, perhaps, bilateral meeting he will have is later on today with the president of France, Emmanuel Macron. And that is important because it comes right at the back of a diplomatic row, a big diplomatic row the U.S. had with France recently after the U.S. announced a strict military pact with Australia and the U.K. That means that Australia had to cancelled a lucrative deal to have France build submarines for it, and instead it went for the U.S. to build those submarines. So now they will have to clarify this issue, of course, President Biden and Macron, and that comes this evening here in Rome, Joe.
Face to face. All right, Claudio, thanks so much for kicking us off.
Okay, let's now bring in Ali Vitale for the very latest on Capitol Hill. Good morning, Ali. Let's talk about what's in and what's now out of the president's new scaled-back spending framework.
Yeah, because at this point, we know what's in and what's out, or at least we have a good idea of where things stand right now. But we also know that they have sort of reached another pause point because last night they couldn't come to enough of agreement and they couldn't have that vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill like Speaker Nancy Pelosi wanted. In terms of what's in and what's out, we saw a lot of the issues that were on the negotiating table last week find their final consensus. On the point of what's in, I can pull it up for you on your screen. You see a lot of clean energy and climate investments, more than $500 billion. It's the biggest price tag item in this bill. A key point for progressives and for the White House in combating climate change. There's also expansion of Medicaid benefits to roughly a dozen states. That was something that members of the Texas and Georgia delegation, for example, lobbied Senator Joe Manchin on. We're also seeing Medicare expansion, but only when it comes to hearing, because then flip to the next slide where you can see what's not in this bill. Things like an expansion of Medicare for hearing, for vision and dental. Those were things that progressives would have wanted to include, but also, and I think this is one of the most important ones, paid family leave, not in this bill at this point. But I've talked to several lawmakers yesterday who say they're not ready to count that out yet.
Yeah, it was supposed to go from 12 weeks down to 4 weeks. I can't imagine Democrats are going to agree with it being completely out. Yeah. Talk about why the president couldn't get this deal over the line before his trip to Europe. What do you think stalled the vote last night? What are your sources telling you?
There are two pieces of this, right? In the House, the dynamics have always been that progressives want to hold the line. They want to see both of these bills taken together. They are linked in the minds of progressives. What progressives needed was not just a framework, but a very fleshed out framework, which is why we've got thousands of pages of bill text now. But they also need assurances from the senators on the other side of this equation. There's a trust deficit, not along ideological lines between progressive and moderate, but also between the two houses of Congress. The House does not want to be hung out to dry on this, and they also don't want to vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill only to see the larger social spending package go out the window because of a loss of political will or a lack of commitment. In terms of where those senators are, though, yesterday I followed around Senator Joe Manchin. Many of the other people in the Capitol Hill press corps spent a lot of time tracking him, tracking Senator Sinema, Senator Bernie Sanders, trying to get them to endorse this framework in a way that could be enough for progressives. And we couldn't get them to do it because it seems like they're just not there. For example, when I caught up with Senator Joe Manchin, and he said this several times yesterday, he continued to say that this is in the hands of the House. He went on at one point yesterday to say, I've been dealing in good faith, and I'm telling everybody they can count on me to continue to deal in good faith. They're fine, I think, hearing that he wants to deal in good faith, but they also need to hear him say that he supports this framework and he will vote for it, because on the other side of this equation is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal holding her caucus together. She met with Senator Kyrsten Sinema yesterday. This is her readout of that conversation.
I met with Senator Kyrsten Sinema today. It was a really good meeting, very productive. And I've been talking, as you know, to Joe Manchin. We will deliver both the BIF, the infrastructure bill, and the remarkably transformational Build Back Better Act. Today, I see the end.
And I think that there are many in the Capitol Hill press corps who don't really know what to take when leaders are using words like soon and imminent, because we've been hearing those words about when a vote could come on this package of legislation for weeks now. It seems, at least at this point, that that could happen next week, because what they did yesterday before leaving Washington for the weekend, guys, they voted to extend the surface transportation bill. That's highway funding, other things that match in the traditional infrastructure category. They extended that until December 3rd, giving themselves the time that they'll need to pass this larger package, but it's not clear exactly when that's going to happen at this point.
All right, we know when it does, you'll be all over it. Ali Vitale, thank you so much.
NBC News has learned the federal government could soon pay out millions of dollars to families separated at the U.S. border. That's according to three sources familiar with ongoing negotiations in a lawsuit filed on behalf of the separated families. The deal being considered would pay out about $450,000 per person in compensation. Under the zero-tolerance policy installed under the Trump administration, more than 5,600 children were separated from their parents. The White House says more than 1,000 families are still estimated to be separated from each other. Now to a major development in the investigation into former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. He has been charged with a misdemeanor sex crime. The charge forcibly touching a former aide while inside the executive mansion in December of last year. The criminal complaint comes just months after a bombshell report from the New York Attorney General's office found at least a dozen women who claimed they were sexually harassed by Cuomo, who eventually resigned in the wake of that report. Former governor categorically denies any misconduct. His lawyer says the charge is all politics. In response to that, New York State Attorney General Letitia James said, quote, "The criminal charges brought against Mr. Cuomo are for forcible touching, further validate the findings in our report." We have two of our best experts this morning, NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter and NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos here to break down this charge for us. Good morning to both of you. Tom, let's start with you. The charge comes as a result of that 165-page report released by the New York Attorney General back in August. Still, some in Albany were actually caught off guard by it, including someone you might not expect. Tell us more about how these charges came about yesterday.
Sure. Well, the local DA was caught off guard by David Soares. I mean, that's where that starts. He put out a statement last night saying he was surprised, just like the rest of us, that these charges happened to come down yesterday, and said that he's not going to be commenting further on this case. What happened here is the Albany County Sheriff's Office went to the court, the Albany City Court, and essentially said, look, this is what we've got, and we think that we have enough. And the court essentially said, you've got enough, and so we're going to charge him, release the criminal complaint, and he's going to be summoned to court. The governor will next appear in court on November 17th at 2:30 p.m., where he'll have to answer for this criminal complaint that was brought yesterday, Joe. It's based on cell phone records. It's based on, believe it or not, BlackBerry PIN messages with the New York State Police, as well as the governor's travel records. We're looking at a state police helicopter there. They were able to get state police records as well as badge records. You know, when you swipe in to get access to a facility, that's just some of the evidence that they say, the Albany County Sheriff's Office says, they have against the governor. So that's where this case stands at this point. A bit of a surprise, but it is moving forward.
Danny, let's talk about the charge. What does it mean to be charged with a Class A misdemeanor, forcible touching, and what does it tell you about the evidence prosecutors have?
Forcible touching is just the touching of another person's intimate parts for sexual gratification or to humiliate them. It is a Class A misdemeanor, which is punishable in New York by up to a year in jail. And I say punishable because that is not a likely sentence for a first-time offender. There's a very strong possibility there would be 0 jail time for a misdemeanor in New York, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the facts. Because the potential sentence is over 6 months, there is a right to a jury trial of 6. But in this case, procedurally in Albany, after the arraignment, when the ex-governor shows up, traditionally the next court hearing, I should say, should be the trial. But with a high-profile defendant like this, a lot of the procedural rules kind of get thrown out the window.
All right, Tom, we know the name of the accuser bringing these charges was withheld. That's standard, of course. But we do know at least one woman who has gone public with her accusation. So what do we know about her, and do we believe she is the one linked to this misdemeanor charge?
That's pretty common. So she's identified as executive assistant number 1 in the Attorney General's report that you referenced. She has come forward in the past speaking to CBS News and saying that the governor groped her by putting his hand under her blouse and grabbing her breast. That's the exact same type of conduct and behavior that's discussed in yesterday's criminal complaint and in those allegations. So we don't know 100%. We've reached out to Comiso and her attorneys. We've not heard back yet whether or not she is, in fact, the victim that's referenced in this criminal complaint. But it is the same type of behavior, and it's something that we'll continue to watch and see and look out for any sort of statements that may come from her today or any sort of acknowledgement that this may, in fact, be her and she may be the victim here in this criminal complaint.
Let's talk about what's next, Danny. Could we expect to see more charges come as a result of this AG report?
It's certainly possible. I mean, as you mentioned, the AG report is a rare instance where you have an attorney general laying out an over 100-page report replete with evidence, documents, interviews, which is really like a blueprint or a plan for a prosecutor or law enforcement to bring charges. So all they need to do is open the page to the jurisdiction that matches theirs and decide whether or not that report gave them enough information or enough leads to go forward and prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt if they want to bring charges against this very high-profile trophy defendant for a lot of prosecutors. And let's face it, he would be a trophy for a lot of local prosecutors who would want to take down someone with a very high profile.
All right. Tom Winter, Danny Cevallos, thank you both so much. We appreciate it.
This morning, New York City is preparing for a possible shortage of first responders. Police officers, firefighters, and other city workers have until 5 p.m. today to get their first COVID vaccine dose. If not, they'll be put on unpaid leave. Hundreds of firefighters protested against the mandate yesterday outside the mayor's home. Right now, more than 160,000 city workers, including firefighters, police officers, and correctional officers, are not vaccinated, and they won't be able to start work on Monday. The battle over these mandates has been dividing the country. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis is now suing the federal government over the Biden administration's December 8th deadline for federal contractors to get vaccinated. Right now, nearly 58% of the U.S. is fully vaccinated. We are just days away from that number getting a major boost, with the possibility of kids ages 5 to 11 being eligible for the shot as early as next week. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us now. Good morning, Dr. Patel. Good news is new cases are down 57% since September 1st. But with the backlash against mandates, winter coming, flu season, do you think we're going to see a spike in cases, in COVID cases in the coming months? Or do you think this is starting to become something we live with?
Yeah, Vicki, good morning. It's a little bit of both. I do think we're going to see an uptick, particularly in areas that still remain heavily under-vaccinated. We still have parts of this country where it's only 33 to 40% of a city, county, in a region that are vaccinated. But to your point, I think we're going to add children to that mix, and that will help to get more people vaccinated. But at the end of the day, it's still a pandemic. And the fact that we're also seeing surging numbers in other countries and that travel has opened up means that we will see hotspots here. But as you point out, we are going to learn to live with this, just like we live with many other viruses that we have vaccines for.
Well, next week we could get that boost. We're talking about nearly 28 million younger kids who could become eligible for the COVID vaccine. What should parents keep an eye on as the CDC now takes up the Pfizer vaccine for kids 5 to 11? And is it a 2-dose regimen for them?
It is. It's a 2-dose regimen. It's a reduced dose of the Pfizer regimen, but looks similar. You get a shot one day, and then 3 weeks later, you need to get the second shot. And here's some good news for parents. In the 5 to 11 age range, the side effects are similar to what adults have, but much less, meaning they do still get fatigue, fevers, and chills. Parents should be looking out for that in the 48 hours after the shots. And then they should also be looking out for anything that seems unusual several days after a shot and absolutely contact their pediatrician. But we have not seen any serious side effects in the trial data. And of course, parents will, if they're waiting and talking to their pediatricians and doctors like myself will also have information based on what we're seeing on the people we're vaccinating.
Yeah, I think that's really important to talk to your child's pediatrician about the concerns that you have and get the answers directly from someone you trust, like you, Dr. Patel. So let's talk about the CDC. This is very interesting. They have now added mental health illnesses, including depression and schizophrenia, to the list of conditions that make people more at risk for COVID. How is that? Why does mental health make people more vulnerable to the virus?
Yeah, Vicki, look, I'm really relieved to see this. Many of us have long held that physical and mental health conditions are one and the same, and studies now show that with COVID. And we believe that people with mental health conditions, about 10% of the United States, by the way, with these mental health conditions, that when they get COVID, there's an interaction between the mental health condition and COVID-19 that makes them more likely to be hospitalized. And with schizophrenia, Vicki, 3 times more likely to die, one study found. So these are just as serious as heart disease, diabetes. And I think what's important for viewers is that this means that if you have one of these conditions, you are in one of those risk categories that qualify you for a booster. So I want people to pay attention to that. Take it seriously. And if you have any questions, talk about it.
Really fascinating. Dr. Kavita Patel, thanks for all the information we need to know this morning.
Major storm is expected to bring heavy rain, high winds, tidal flooding to the D.C. area today.
Yes, we've gotten some cold weather, a lot of rainy weather. Bill Cairns joins us now with the very latest. Bill, good morning and happy Friday.
Yeah, good morning. Happy Friday to you guys. And it's unbelievable. We're actually doing this on the 9-year anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, too. So, it's going to be pretty wild, the pictures you're going to see from the mid-Atlantic region later on tonight and tomorrow with this coastal flooding. We expect homes to be flooded. We expect businesses, roads to be closed. And it's not even from like a hurricane. I mean, this is going to be one of the worst coastal flooding events going all the way back to Hurricane Isabel in 2003. So let me try to explain why. So we have this huge storm. It's not that powerful, but it's a huge storm located almost right over the top of Nashville right now. And this is right on the heels of that nor'easter. And what happened is the nor'easter a couple days ago built the water up on the East Coast, especially back in the bays. That water didn't get time to retreat out. And now those winds have reversed direction and they're blowing up the bays. And so we have more water coming on top of the water that was already there from the nor'easter. And that's the reason that we have this coastal flood warnings in effect for the Jersey Shore all the way down through Maryland and Delaware and Virginia. 18 million people are impacted. And again, this will be one of the top 3 in some cases flood events in a lot of these areas history. So this isn't just like a random, flood event. This will be historic in some areas. We'll also have rainfall to deal with around the D.C. area to Boston to New York. It's going to be a soggy next 2 days as that storm system moves up towards the north. We don't expect too much flooding problems, just isolated. And the winds will also be pretty high, too. We could see isolated power outages, wind gusts possible 55 to 60 on the coast. Inland areas around Baltimore and D.C., probably 30 to 40 miles per hour. So here's those peak wind gusts. So you get the idea. It's going to be a raw, rainy, and if you're near the coast, scary flood situation as we go throughout that high tide cycle, especially this evening. So here's the forecast for today, guys. Middle of the country is going to be kind of windy and dry. The West Coast, no problems with the exception of the Pacific Northwest. They've been dealing with a lot of heavy rain and flooding on their own. So, I call this like a sneaky storm because it doesn't have a name, and it's going to be one of the worst flood events in the Mid-Atlantic that we've seen in a couple decades.
Our Joe is heading up to Washington, D.C. for Saturday today with Kristen Welker. So
maybe.
Good luck, Joe.
We'll see. All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.